Did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scripture said in the passage about Elijah? Like I said, it was a perfect verse. How he appealed to God against Israel. Lord, they have killed your prophets. They have torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too, at this present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. And if by grace, it is no longer by works. If it were by grace, it would not. If it were, grace would no longer be grace. So, just as God told Elijah, you're not the only one left. Paul says, we're not the only one left. God has always reserved a remnant. He always knows who is his, and he has not rejected his people. So, that was a perfect verse I did not use last week, but I figured I had to this week. So, we're in 1 Kings chapter 21, and we're going to read the first 16 verses. And now it came about after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab the king of Samaria. Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, give me your vineyard that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is close beside my house, and I will give you a better vineyard than it is in its place, if you like. I will give you the price of it in money. But Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid me that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. So Ahab came into his house, sullen and vexed, because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed, and he turned away his face, and he ate no food. But Jezebel his wife came to him and said to him, how is it that your spirit is so sullen, and that you are eating no food? So he said to her, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I will give you a vineyard in its place. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Jezebel, his wife, said to him, do you not now reign over Israel? Arise, eat your bread. Let your heart be joyful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were living with Naboth in his city. Now she wrote in the letters, saying, proclaim a fast and seat Naboth at the head of the people, and seat 2 worthless men before him, and let them testify against him, saying, you curse God and the king, and then take him out and stone him to death. So the men of the city, the elders and the nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them, just as it was written in the letters which she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast, and they seated Naboth at the head of the people. Then 2 worthless men came in and sat down before him. The worthless men testified against him, even against Naboth, before the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. So they took him outside the city, and they stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent word to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. When Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab rose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. You know, I don't know about you, but that's just one of those stories that kind of makes you mad, you know. It just really upsets you. That they would go to such lengths and do such an awful thing. And you say, well, you know, this is a class about Elijah, and we haven't even mentioned Elijah's name. And we haven't. But if you notice, the title of this lesson was Elijah Waits in the Wings, because he's going to come back next week and kind of put God's ruling on this thing. You know, God sometimes kind of delays things. He doesn't carry them out quite like we would. But 2 Peter 3, 8 and 9 says, do not forget one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some count slowness. He is patient for you, not wanting any to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. The chapter we skipped, chapter 20, God actually works with Ahab. You know, you would think, having seen what he saw up on that mountain when Elijah called for fire, and the fire came down and ate up absolutely everything. You know, the sacrifice, the altar, the wood, even the water, licked up the water. I still love that. See that? The fire licking up the water. You would think that Ahab would have responded in repentance, but instead he runs down to Jezebel and tells her everything that's gone on, and then she issues this letter, you know, to her followers to take to Elijah, saying, we're going to kill you before the day's out. And Elijah runs. But God sends a prophet to Ahab in chapter 20. Because the Syrians were fixing to march on him. And the prophet tells Ahab, I will grant you the victory. And he says the reason is, in verse 13, behold, I will deliver them into your hand today, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. The battle, and he asked the prophet, should we wait till they attack, or we attack first? He says, no, you initiate the battle. And so he does initiate the battle, and he defeats the Syrians. Ben-Hadad, I think, is the king there. So things are going along, but that doesn't change Ahab. You would think that would change Ahab. The experience on the mountain, and now God, with his prophet, delivering this victory to him. But the prophet comes back to him and says, hey, they're coming back. They're coming back. But God will grant you the victory this time too, so that, in verse 28, therefore I will give you this great multitude into your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And he does. The Israelites kill over 100,000 of the Syrians. And others run into a city and a wall falls on them and kills 27,000 that were left over. Now you tell me who won that battle. Yeah, it's not Ahab. They were grossly outnumbered. The battle was sure to go to the Syrians, and yet time after time, you know, God reduces the army so that it is so small, there's no doubt who wins the battle. It has to be God. Well, in this case, it didn't matter. They amassed such a huge army to run over them. As a matter of fact, the king sends in word and says, by the time we're done, there will be such a rubble in that town that there won't be enough dust to fill up the hands of all the soldiers that are marching on you. Now, that's kind of a bizarre saying, but it means that the army is so massive, it is so huge, that if we grind that entire city down to nothing and all of my soldiers try to pick up a handful, there won't be enough. That's a threat. And Ahab, strengthened by God, said, bring it on. Now you would think at that point Ahab would repent. Ahab would be God's man. Ahab would talk to God. But Ben-Hadad, in the Syrian king, sends word to Ahab and says, I want to negotiate a treaty. The guy who has no army left, the guy who was just soundly defeated, I want to negotiate a treaty. I will give you back all the cities that my dad took from you. And we will set up trading in Damascus. We will have great commerce together. And Ahab says, oh yeah, sounds like a good deal. Didn't talk to God in any of that. Kind of reminds you of the Israelites when who was the group that came and they were all in sackcloth and ashes, and they like traveled umpteen million miles, And they were just passing through, and could we make a treaty with you? And the Israelites said, oh, yeah, sure. And lo and behold, they were right there in the midst of the promised land. They should have been wiped out. They didn't consider God. And so that people were a noose around Israel's neck because they failed to include God in the discussion. Well, another prophet of God disguises himself, and he comes to Ahab, and instead of putting a little proverb out there the way Nathan does for David, this prophet actually acts it out. He's wounded. He actually has another prophet wound him, and he disguises himself. And when Ahab comes along, he says, excuse me, I was entrusted to take care of a prisoner who was bound for destruction. And yet I got distracted in all the things that were going on with the battle and all, and I've lost the prisoner. What is going to happen to me? Will I die in his stead? And Ahab said, yeah, you pronounced that sentence yourself. And the prophet takes off his disguise. And he says, yes, that's exactly what will happen. You had an individual in your grasp that was bound for destruction, and you let him go. You have passed your own sentence. Ahab recognized that prophet. And the last verse of the previous chapter says something really interesting. It says, so the king of Israel went into his house, sullen and vexed, and came to Samaria. Doesn't that sound familiar? Because what happens now? Right? He goes to Jezreel, the city where he has another castle, probably the original place before he built up Damascus, right? Or the city of Samaria, in Samaria. And he goes in there and he sees this vineyard next to his house. And he says, hey, that'd make a great garden. That would make a great garden for me. So he goes to Naboth, who owns the vineyard, and he says, give me your vineyard. Now, I'll buy it, whatever seems like a good price for you, or we can swap it out. You know, if you would prefer another vineyard, I will get you a better vineyard for that one because I want that one that's right next to my property. And what does Naboth say? No, can't do that. Why could he not do that? Yeah, it's actually against the law. He says, no, that is the inheritance of my fathers. I can't do that. And so Ahab goes back to his little castle, and he's whining, and he's all upset because he can't get that vineyard. I'm not even going to eat my food. Goes, throws himself on the bed, turns his back to everybody in the house. Do you remember who appointed the first king of Israel? Samuel, wasn't it? Well, yes, God does the ultimate appointment. That is very true. But he, Samuel, the people came to Samuel and they said, we want a king. We want to be like all the other nations around us. And Samuel got all bent out of shape because he felt like they were rejecting him as being priest and prophet. And so he goes to God and he says, the people want a king so they can be like everybody else. And God tells him what? Well, first he says, don't worry. They haven't rejected you, but they have rejected me, as they have done since the very day that I brought them up out of Egypt. So he says, you give them a king, but you tell them, you give them this warning. So in 1 Samuel 8, Samuel tells the people all the words that the Lord had told him, those who were asking for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve in his chariots and horses. They will run in front of his chariots. Some of them he will assign to be commanders of thousands, commanders of 50s, others to plow his grounds and reap his harvest. Still others make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards. Whoa. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage, and give it to his officials and to his attendants, your maidservants, and your men servants and your maidservants, and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king that you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. Wow. Just like the Lord said. It's exactly what's going to happen. But you know, the law of Moses had something to say about property too. In Leviticus chapter 25, verses 23 through 28, the land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, says the Lord, and you are but aliens and my tenants. Throughout the country that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. So if one of your countrymen becomes poor and sells some of his property, the nearest relative is to come and redeem what that countryman has sold. If, however, a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he himself prospers and acquires sufficient means to redeem it, he shall determine the value of the years for which he sold it and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can then go back to his own property. But if he does not acquire the means to repay, what he sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. And then it will return, and he can go back to his property. So there is provision in God's law that that property will never, ever leave the family. Never. Naboth is acting according to God's plan. God said the land would stay with the people it was given to. So he's not being stingy, and certainly he could have sold it if he wanted to, or if he needed to, with the provision that he could get it back anytime he wanted, or anytime he was able, because that was what the law said. But that's not the way this individual says. It's interesting, too, that there could be an occasion, it didn't happen often, but there could be occasion when land would be inherited by daughters. And so there's a restriction placed on them. In Numbers 36, 5 through 9, the Lord gave this command to Moses, to the Israelites. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. This is what the Lord commands of Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please as long as they marry from the tribal clan of their father. No inheritance in Israel is to pass from tribe to tribe, for every Israelite shall keep the tribal land inherited from his forefathers. Every daughter who inherits the land in any Israelite tribe must marry someone in her father's tribal clan, so that every Israelite will possess the inheritance of his fathers. No inheritance may pass from tribe to tribe, for each Israelite tribe is to keep the land it inherits. So it's not like Naboth is going out there and trying to be stingy. He's not trying to raise the price. He said exactly what the law says. He cannot sell the land that was inherited by his family. But he gets all bent out of shape, and then, of course, Jezebel comes to him and says, "What are you crying? Why are you acting this way?" And so he goes through the story, you know. And what does she say? She's kind of incensed, is she not? Get up, act like a man. Don't you rule over Israel? Eat your food. I'll get the land for you. That's not a problem. You see, where she came from, kings owned everything. They didn't have the restrictions that God had placed on the kings with the law, or the other restrictions that God had placed on all the people with the law. But she's used to, if I'm a king, I just take it. And so she does. She devises this plan, and she writes letters. She uses Ahab's signature. She uses Ahab's seal. She uses Ahab's papyrus, if that's what they have, you know, and sends it out to the elders and nobles. And I almost coughed when I read nobles. They're not nobles that would receive something. They're not noble if they would receive something like this and act on it, right? They're not. No way, shape, form, or fashion. How do we fight covetousness? You know, Ahab's being covetous here, right? This is somebody else's garden or somebody else's vineyard. He wants it. He's even having a hissy fit because he can't have it. Is that not covetous? You know, if you look at the 10 Commandments, isn't that actually one of them? It is. It's number 10, right? And he goes, the Lord goes through a laundry list of things, but he ends up by saying, and anything else that belongs to your neighbor. How do we fight it? How do we fight covetousness? We're stuck with it? Yeah, one of the commentators said, you know, covetousness is one of those things that is mostly on the inside, but it will almost help you to break any and all of the other 10 commandments. And if you look back at Ahab, he certainly blew the first 5 right off the bat, right? Because they all deal with God. So he's taken his name in vain. He's had other gods before him. You can just go down them, right? I don't know about the Sabbath, but my guess is he certainly violated that too. But then the rest of them deal with a relationship one with another. And he's checking them off the list right here, right? Covetous, right? In the very first 4 verses of this. Covetous. Now we're going to get into what? False witness? Well, that's on the list too, right? That's another one of the 10 Commandments. We're going to get false witness here because Jezebel is going to come up with this evil plan to steal somebody else's property and send lies out. And then we're going to have folks conspiring against others and telling lies. And then we're going to have murder. And that's on the list too, isn't it? And then we're going to have stealing. That's on the list too, isn't it? You see, it all started maybe with this covetous, but he's just going to click off the list. Just click off the list. He's going to violate them all. One of the things, I think, 1 Timothy 6 through 10, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we should be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into a temptation and a trap, and in many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. People eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Luke chapter 12, Jesus, when he was asked about dividing an inheritance, says, watch out. Be on your guard for all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And James 1, 16 through 18, do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good and perfect gift comes from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits in all that he created. So Jezebel comes up with a plan. She sends out a proclamation, declare a day of fasting, seat Naboth in a prominent place, 2 others, scoundrels, opposite him to testify against him that he has cursed both God and king, then take him out and stone him to death. Proverbs 6, 16 through 19 says, there are 6 things, yea, there are 7. There are 6 things that God hates, yea, there are 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. Now, I don't know about her eyes, but she certainly has a lying tongue. She's fixing to shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked schemes. Well, she got that one. Feet that are quick to rush to evil. She got that one. A false witness who pours out lies. She got that one. And a man who stirs up dissension among the brothers. She got that one too. She's got 6 out of the 7, if not 7 out of the 7, because I can't look at her eyes. But I think they're haughty because she's already told him, stand up, act like a man. You know, you rule over Israel. You can have anything you want. I'll take care of it. Yeah, she got 7 out of 7 in my book. She checked every box of the thing that the Lord hates and despises. I don't want to be on that list. Don't want to be on that list. Now, these elders, these noble people, they get this letter, and they go, oh, yeah, we can do that. Why? Why? Why would they do that? Yeah. They don't want their property taken next, right? They don't want to be the one that's under the next conspiracy. They don't want to be the one who's killed. It's interesting to me that she goes through all this effort. Why didn't she just go down there and execute the guy? You know, why didn't she just kill him? But puts up this whole charade. And these people carried it out. Now, tell me, who's guilty? Who's guilty here? Jezebel? Oh, yeah. How about the elders? How about these so-called nobles? Oh, yeah. How about the other people that were at that meal? Yeah. Yeah, they were too. Well, yeah, she didn't want it coming back on her. or her husband in this case. So as a result, they take him outside the city and they stone him to death. 2 Kings 9, verse 24 through 26 talks about this thing running full circle. Jehu drew his bow and he shot Joram, who's Ahab's son, between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart and he slumped down in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his chariot officer, pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Whoa. Remember how you and I were riding in our chariots together behind Ahab his father when the Lord made this prophecy about him, saying, yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, and I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground, declares the Lord. Now pick him up and throw him on that plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord. You know, 1 Kings does not mention his sons, but apparently they took care of that too. Apparently, they not only stoned Naboth, but they executed his sons as well. That way, there's no inheritance, right? Stealing the property is a whole lot easier if you wipe out the folks that are going to inherit it. Do you remember back in Genesis when Cain killed Abel? And the Lord went to Cain and he says, where's your brother? And Cain's response was what? Oh, no. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, in essence, God said yes. But what he says next is really kind of interesting. He says, the blood of your brother is crying out to me from the ground. What was it that 2 Kings said? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The Lord's all about that blood. In Luke chapter 11, verses 47 through 51, woe to you because you build tombs for the prophets. It was your forefathers who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your forefathers did. They killed the prophets. They built up their tombs. Because of this, that God in his wisdom has said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill, others they will persecute. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that have been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel through the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all. God tracks the blood. Life, he says, is in the blood. It's interesting, too, in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22, the Hebrew writer says this, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood sprinkled that speaks better than the blood of Abel. Wow, that's where we are. And God tracks the blood. The elders and the nobles had a responsibility. Under the law, they had a responsibility. In Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 15 through 21, the law says there, a single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of an iniquity or a sin of any matter that he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. So, she's got 2 or 3 witnesses, right? And that's the end of the matter, right? Well, no, that's not what the law says. Keep reading. If a malicious witness rises up against a man and accuses him of wrongdoing, both of the men that have a dispute shall stand before the Lord, and the priest and the judges who will be in office in those days, and the judges shall investigate thoroughly. What happened to the investigate thoroughly? You've got 2 guys that say he did this, and he's saying, no, I didn't. What happened to the investigate thoroughly? There is an investigation required by the law. If the judges investigate thoroughly and they find this witness to be a false witness, that he has accused a brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he intended to be done to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Matthew chapter 15, 16 through 20, Jesus says, are you lacking in understanding? Do you not understand that everything that goes out of the mouth passes through the stomach, or into the mouth rather, passes through the stomach and is eliminated? But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and these are those that defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are the things that defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands, that doesn't defile a man. And in Luke chapter 17, verses 1 through 4, Jesus said to his disciples, things that cause people to sin are bound to come. They will happen. But woe to the person through whom they come. It would be better for that person if he was thrown into the sea with a millstone about his neck than he caused one of these little ones of mine to sin. Jezebel, the elders, and the so-called nobles caused the individuals in that assembly that day to commit murder. They are just as guilty as Jezebel, as the elders and the nobles, because nobody bothered to investigate. And God says, woe to him through whom sin comes. We have got to be alert. There are people out there who would love to do just to us exactly as Jezebel did to these people. She manipulated them. She provided false witnesses. They did not follow the law. They did not check on the witnesses. They did not do an investigation. They did not check this out. If they had the witnesses, they had to know this guy. These are people of the town. These are not strangers. Now, these 2 guys they brought in, they may have been strangers. They knew Naboth. He'd been there. His family's been there. That vineyard is in the family. They knew him. They knew what kind of man he was. And yet they fell for this hook, line, and sinker, and they executed a man, and they may have even been part of executing his sons. Because God holds Ahab responsible for it all. Somebody that God had provided a giant miracle on a mountain to convince. And then 2 battles, one right after the other, where he says, "You will know that I am God." Ahab stands without an excuse. And next week, Elijah is coming back to call him into accounts. Thank you very much for your attention this morning. We'll pick up again next week.